This isn't tittle-tattle. This isn't gossip. There are documents here. You know, there are allegations of women being sexually trafficked or sex trafficked into the UK.
On an industrial scale.
On an industrial scale.
What I think is it is probably one of the biggest crises since the abdication.
But I think that Andrew's the poison.
Has this been covered up? I mean, I suggest people go and read into the Watergate scandal and see how things like this develop.
The late Queen, after a whole lifetime of service, yes, Andrew was a blind spot, for sure, for all of her achievements.
It's just an idea. Could the royal family just literally sacrifice Prince Andrew to save themselves?
It actually feels quite chaotic because I don't think we're anywhere near the end of this.
I think it's a time for major reform.
Welcome to Royal Exclusive, where this week has been the most dramatic week for the royal family since the last one, because the net is now tightening around Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor as police are finally primed to investigate sickening and increasingly scandalous allegations which he continues to deny. Our royals are both deeply concerned and profoundly concerned about the revelations and stand ready to assist the police. But should they have acted before? Should they do more now? Is this really a crisis to end all crises? Can the monarchy be saved? We'll take a deep breath because luckily we have two of the best experts in the field. Please welcome news.com.au's royal reporter Bronte Coy and the godfather of royal reporting and author Robert Jobson. Welcome to you both. A huge week. We have had statements. We have had statements from the royal family, from the police. But Rob, are we now moving into the era of this story where we're going to start seeing some accountability from everyone involved?
I'm not sure it's an existential crisis. What I think is it is probably one of the biggest crises since the abdication. It embroils the whole of the British establishment. You know, once the Mandelson side of it got involved, we're dealing with people thinking the Prime Minister could be brought down, rather like, you know, the Profumo in the 1960s scandal. But I think that the big issue here now is, there's more information coming out all the time. The royal family, the monarchy, has to get ahead of the curve. And they have to really, if you like, clean the stable. They know what is coming. They must have had proper sit-down conversations, the king with his brother, and saying, well, what else is there? And if he hasn't, he needs to be doing that now. Because I think what is important for the royal family is they're seen to be clean. They are seen to have not done anything wrong. And as it stands at the moment, and I think it is a real problem for them, it's developing into, if you like, a crisis that's just developing online, and there's more and more information coming out. But they've got to essentially just provide who knew what, when did they know it, and is this institution fit for purpose now? Are they going to be clean? Is it going to be in the future? Can we make sure that we don't have to wait 100 or 50 years to find out information about what went on? We need to know that this institution is fit for purpose. Otherwise, what is the point of it?
Well, Bronte, you mentioned there about talking about who knows what and when. Thames Valley Police this week, the police, the area that covers where Andrew lived, I think there's about 2 investigations or 2 assessments that they're carrying out at the moment regarding a woman that was allegedly trafficked to Royal Lodge, and also whether Andrew passed information to Epstein. And this statement that they issued, where earlier this week, they said, "We have engaged in discussions with specialist Crown prosecutors from the CPS. During an assessment phase, information is evaluated to determine a criminal offence is suspected and whether a full investigation is required." Based on all the allegations that we've been hearing for years, but really building up in recent weeks and days, you can't make that statement based on all that knowledge and not investigate or not question members of the royal family.
Well, absolutely. As Rob said, and you said it right at the top of the show, we're in that era now where there has to be accountability. This scandal has been hanging over the royal family's head for 15 years or more. And at this point now, with the information developing, it actually feels quite chaotic because I don't think we're anywhere near the end of this. There were 3 million documents released almost 2 weeks ago, and every single day there's at least one new completely shocking headline involving either the UK government or, in this case, the royal family. And so there needs to be accountability. We also know, based on the headlines today, that there appears to have been visitors to the royal residences there would have been staff involved in knowing these people were coming and going.
Well, this is the front page of The Sun today when we're filming, and it's words from the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and he's talking about up to 90 so-called Lolita flights into the UK, at least one of them involving Andrew.
This is absolutely shocking. And you can't even imagine, back when we first heard the Newsnight interview 6 years ago, you can't even imagine that all of these details would have come out. And exactly as you're saying, I think that there will have to be questions asked of people that were working in the royal residences, what they knew, when they knew it, because there is meticulous documentation of visitors. And these are huge claims. And it does, what has happened in the last couple of weeks is we've seen there is rot. There is rot along all of the upper echelons of powerful industries. This is impacting people all over the world. But as it relates to the royal family, they must be seen to investigate that rot. We now know that's there. We know that it's there. This
isn't tittle-tattle. This isn't gossip. There are documents here. You know, there are allegations of women being sexually trafficked or sex trafficked into the UK.
On an industrial scale.
On an industrial scale. We need to speak briefly about the palace reaction, because we have heard words from, well, firstly a spokesman. Secondly, both of them were spokesmen, I believe. We haven't actually had anything coming personally from any of the members of the royal family. But the first one was in Saudi Arabia, Rob. I was in Saudi Arabia, this was Monday morning, and we were sat there in a room having a briefing about Prince William's trip, and kind of unprompted, actually, during this briefing, I can confirm the Prince and Princesses... He said, I can confirm the Prince and Princess have been deeply concerned by continuing revelations. Their thoughts remain focused on the victims. What do you think of that statement?
It was almost a carbon copy of what the King had said and the Queen had said earlier, and what Prince Edward, when he was, at least he said it, when he was actually questioned live on stage and they had no press officer there to help him. I think they were trying to, in PR terms, make sure they had try to address the issue before William's trip, so it didn't completely take over the trip, which of course it overwhelmed the trip. I mean, you had all these TV broadcasters broadcasting back to London with the desert in the background talking about Epstein files and the crisis.
Did that statement go strongly enough for you?
No. I think that it was a bit of a damage limitation. I think the King's statement went much further. He addressed the issue about his brother. I mean, the William statement didn't even mention his uncle. It didn't, we could all have, it didn't even mention that. So I think that the King's statement went further, and the fact that the police were involved, and they're now undertaking a scoping exercise before making a decision about whether it can be then officially referred to the Crown Prosecution Service. But the reality there is that, if they're going to look at this, they've got to look at it on wider scale, an institutional scale, as well as the Andrew side of it, which does complicate it. But the point of it is, you can't do that unless you actually formally arrest someone, i.e. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, Sarah Ferguson, and interview under caution. Because we've seen and we know, categorically we know, that he lied when he was interviewed by the BBC and Emily Maitlis. So to get an actual proper interview now, it needs to be done under caution, which will involve an arrest.
We will maybe get a little bit more into that as the discussion continues. Bronte, on Monday, it was a hell of a day. Mm-hmm. Okay, we had the statement there, from the spokesman. We were all sat in the room. But later that afternoon, the Buckingham Palace issued a statement. Now, interesting, it says, I'll read this out to you, because while William and Catherine were deeply concerned, this statement says the King has made it clear in words through unprecedented actions his profound concern at allegations which continue to come to light in respect of Mr Mountbatten-Windsor's conduct. The King went a little bit further, but is that still enough for you?
Oh, this is such a complicated one. As you said, we have now seen that Andrew categorically lied to the public. We know that from the interviews and the statements he'd put out previously. I think that in October, when the King took the action, then that was the appropriate action, assuming that Andrew was giving him the same story as he was giving the rest of us. And he took quite decisive action. As this story moves along, and it's moving very fast, I think this hasn't quite met the moment. I think that it's strong. It is exactly what needs to happen. Of course, they should cooperate with the police, should the police come knocking. But as I mentioned earlier, there is a rot. We now know there is that rot. There is absolutely a call for further investigations into the entire institution, who was coming and going in these residences, what was going on under their roof. And I think that probably he should have pushed it forward further in that way, because I think this is only just catching up with the news cycle. And I think that this is such an evolving story. It needs to be that he is so clearly on the side of accountability and finding justice. I think that needs to go a bit stronger at this point.
Well, why do you think it's taken so long for these two statements to come out this week?
Well, there's a couple of reasons, isn't there? I mean, has this been covered up? I mean, I suggest people go and read into the Watergate scandal and see how things like this develop, because it's only when actual evidence starts emerging that cover-ups are exposed. I mean, I think there's one massive issue here, and it's involved in, as the Sun rightly reported and questioned, the money. We know that somebody, with the palace sources, whispering in people's ears, saying this, that, and the other, but we do know a large sum of money was paid to Virginia Giuffre Roberts. It was paid, essentially, in my opinion, as it seems now, as hush money. The reality is they wanted to shut down that story. But they're like the guy at the dike, they're putting their finger in the wall and the water's coming out everywhere else. The issue, and I think with any issue when it comes to a scandal, is to follow the money. And I think the money, when it actually all comes out in the open, where that money came from, who paid what, when and how, I think that is going to be incredibly damning.
Well, with this story, so all these payments are highly confidential, obviously. And as you say, we wrote a story saying that up to 12 million was paid, and we said this is to Virginia Giuffre to make the case go away. Queen around 7 million, 3 million from Prince Philip's, late Prince Philip's estate, 1.5 million from the King, which is not. We haven't had an official statement denying it, but there's palace sources saying about the 1.5 million. But what's wrong with paying that money out? Virginia Giuffre needed compensation.
Well, I mean, my only thing I sense here is if you see those films like Henry V, and they're charging down, and the King's there in the battlefield, and it's like protect the King. So what they're doing here is effectively, with the great sadness and great respect to Her late Majesty, she's no longer here, nor is Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, to defend himself. So what they're doing is the courtiers, they're protecting the King. That's what's going on here. He knew nothing about it. Well, let's just hope that in the millions of documents that come out in the next however long, that they are not proven to have got that wrong, or that they have told the absolute truth.
I don't think that the royal family throwing in the money for this settlement. Yes, it's a terrible look, to really just put it mildly. But with that said, we come into this a lot with these royal family issues. It's also a family. But also, of course, the late Queen was the head of state. So, okay, yes, we need to look at it in terms of following the money and making sure there's not a cover-up. Back in 2022, when this was all playing out, it was the Jubilee year, there was a lot going on. As a mother, again, if he was looking her in the eye, I mean, none of us really bought his story in the Newsnight interview, but he was presumably lying to her in exactly the same way that he was lying to everyone else. As a mother, she would have wanted to believe him. He didn't have the means to pay for it himself, apparently. And therefore, I think on that level, people will fundamentally understand why they've chipped in. I don't think that's necessarily the damning part. We are also moving into awkward territory with all of these details now because, of course, the late Queen, after a whole lifetime of service, yes, Andrew was a blind spot, for sure, for all of her achievements. I think this is the one that was the blind spot. But she's not around to react now to the new allegations. We don't know how she would have reacted now with all of the evidence that's come out and the leaked emails, etc.
This is a really important point because my understanding is Andrew told his family exactly the same story that he was telling everybody on Newsnight, which was, I cut off all contact. The minute that the stories dropped in the Sun on Sunday, the Mail on Sunday, on the same day, revealing that he had emailed Epstein afterwards, that's when the royal family reacted, and that's when the King...
Which is fair.
Yeah.
That's where I always come back to. You have to assume that he was telling them exactly the same story, as you're saying. And therefore, you look at their reactions in line with that. And that is also why I said just earlier, I think now that we do know so much more and there is evidence of it and his word has been proven to be false on so many of these topics, now they have to go in as hard as possible because now they do actually know.
Well, now, actually, the problem they've got, and it's because it's under a police investigation. It has to now be left to the police investigation. And I suppose that's probably why the King would just say, look, we're going to cooperate with the police. And it's almost in a way, it's you really wouldn't want to be those police officers because now you've got this team of police officers and the CPS. They're going to have to do the most thorough job because the police will be criticised if whatever happens either way. They'll say, well, it's a cover-up if they don't charge somebody and actually interview people under oath, or they say, then they can be blamed for all the fallout. And their senior officers, after all, the police, are part of the service on behalf of His Majesty the King. It's a real problem for the British establishment, this. And this is because there's so much involved in terms of, we had a scandal in the church with abuse, the Archbishop of Canterbury lost his job. We've got Mandelson now. We don't know where that's going to go, but there's going to be a parallel link there with the Andrew one, because if he goes to prison or he has to have a case brought against him, people are going to say, well, Mandelson's had a case against him, what about Andrew? So there does have, as we started to say at the beginning, there has to be accountability. And that's what the problem the King has faced. He can't really do an awful lot, more than he's done at this moment, apart from go on the television and say, I can assure you we will be accountable and we will make sure that we cooperate in every way and tell people that there are obviously things have gone wrong in the past and we'll make sure we'll be as transparent as possible going forward. He is in a problem because now it's over to the police.
And also it's the King's courts, right? So if this
That's
now,
right.
I'm not a lawyer, but if this goes through the courts, I did think
Well, they
that
can't
with his
interview
statement.
him. I mean, the Queen couldn't give evidence on the Barrel trial.
And he could also, that's why I think also in the statement, I will say, would have been tricky, the wording, because if it does then get prosecuted, surely whatever he's said in a statement, look, legally it gets quite messy.
Well, lawyers are very clever people. Remember in the Barrel trial, I remember covering that trial. You were probably both very young in school. But I remember that was such a shock when they did the deal, essentially because the Queen, the monarch, remembered that she'd said something to Burrell, apparently, allegedly, and that she'd told, and the King, the current King, the Prince of Wales, passed that on. And as a result, they couldn't bring a case whereby Her Majesty would have to be brought to her court to give evidence in her court in a criminal trial. So the case collapsed. Now, is that going to be the same with Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor?
Well, the point about accountability is not necessarily the royal family and King's accountability. It's Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. That's the accountability we're talking about. So are we going to see, as I say, the police, the royal family have said that if approached by Thames Valley Police, we stand ready to support. Are we going to see Prince Andrew interviewed, arrested, in handcuffs,
Well, it
jailed?
can't just be Andrew. It has to be the King. It has to be Amanda Thirsk, his private secretary, all members of staff that work there. They have to hand over emails that are interacting. It's a huge, real problem for the monarchy because this, unlike we live in this 21st century where so much information comes out, the younger people, are far cleverer than me they're getting information from all sorts of places. It's not like the abdication crisis where the papers were delivered with bits cut out so that they didn't talk about Wallace Simpson and the King. They actually would serve in papers with lumps of bits cut out. That's how ridiculous it was. They know what's going on. They want to know more. And if there's any hint of a cover-up, it's both the case of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. Yes, of course, he has to answer questions. But the whole institution does. People that worked for that institution, people whose salaries were paid for by the institution. And there will be whole loads of emails. And the problem you've got here is this is institution. I've covered this story for 36 years. They're a very secretive organisation. They do not answer under the Freedom of Information Act. The Official Secrets Act is quoted at you every term. They don't discuss security. And when they're getting things that are not quite working for them, they whisper in friendly journalists' ears to actually put the other side of the story without actually denying anything. So therefore, those sort of games are going to have to stop. And they're going to have to actually they're going to have to change. They're going to have to be a far more transparent, accountable institution.
Amen, Robert Jobs. Completely agree. On the point of accountability, Bronte, is Andrew going to, face some kind of justice? Does he deserve? I know the police have said that they would need a bit of time, and as Rob's just outlined there's a lot of things for them to go through. But is Andrew going to face this accountability?
Well, firstly, I want them to take the time that they need because this does, for all the reasons you've said, need to be meticulous. This has to be done so carefully. Andrew is now facing allegations, very serious allegations, with evidence compiling of misconduct in public office. He's facing allegations of being part of an industrial-sized sex trafficking ring. These things have to be answered to in a very serious way. And as we say, with investigations, and I don't think people will settle for anything less, nor should they. There's an idea of this entitlement. And I mean this in terms of Andrew, he's the poster boy for it at the moment in the royal family. in that there is this idea that there's one set of rules for him and one set of rules for everyone else, including people like Mandelson. So he needs to be answerable. This absolutely has to be taken to the nth degree, but it must be done very carefully. And I think that the time for him just being pushed off to the side now is over. I think we spoke a lot about this last year before this latest pile of documents came out. And I did say, yes, he's gone now. He's living on private property. He's not any burden on taxpayers. But that's changed now. I think now it absolutely has to go further. And I think that people will not settle for anything less.
Could the royal family, it's just an idea, could the royal family just literally sacrifice Prince Andrew to save themselves? Or could the royal family, almost sacrifice Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor?
Well, they seem to be happy to sacrifice the reputation of Her late Majesty the Queen. She seems to be now getting it from the insiders. So to protect the king, I think that they could well be a situation where I think that the king is probably already considering that, yeah. But it's not really sacrificing, is it? If illegality has taken place, if he deserves to be subject to the rule of law of this country, then it's not a question of sacrifice, it's a question of justice.
And also, again, so much has happened in the last few years, but the king has only been the king for a few years, and he'd have to be thinking about legacy. And he's been tangled up in this mess for years. And surely now as well, he will be, in terms of his statement and the way that he's thinking to the future with this, he would have to be thinking now what his legacy is going to be. And this could end up being the Andrew scandal for another few years. This could be the majority of his reign, and surely he doesn't want that to be the case.
And he's a decent man, and he's a good man. To stress both of those points. And I think that if you saw the film Harmony, and ironically that was, they had the premiere of when all this stuff started to drop, that's what he wants his legacy to be. And, and it seems you shouldn't really necessarily judge the man by his brother. But I remember having an exchange with the king many years ago. And I did a commentary piece, and somehow that commentary piece, we were on a plane, got him to read the commentary piece, and he came back with all scrawls on it, and the person then showed it to me. And the one thing that I'd written power, royal power, and things like that in it, and that was all scribbled out, and the word leadership was written in. Leadership, that's what he was stressing. And I suggest that, unfortunately, this is a man who is courageously fighting cancer. He is doing his very best to achieve what he can for the country, and I think he does a sterling job. But now, at this time when he needs that strength, his other son's on the other side of the Atlantic, his brother is behaved this way, he needs the strength and support of his son, William, which I think he's got, but he needs to show that leadership. And unfortunately, that's really tough on him, but that's what it comes down to.
It's so interesting, just as a side note, that gleaning that part of his personality from that little anecdote.
Well, he never sleeps on a plane. So I was writing a piece for the Standard, and it meant that I was going to file it when I landed. It was about actually him taking the chair, taking it over from Her Majesty at the cenotaph, because she was at that time not well enough, or not mobile enough. It was all about coming downstairs and her having to reverse back from the cellar, and she couldn't do that. And so I'd written this piece, and then it was passed to him, and he literally just works all the time. And so, but there he was, and it was scrawled. I mean, I desperately wanted the person who'd given it to him to give me. I nearly got it, but he quickly realised what I was up to, and he put it back in his pocket. But the word leadership is what it's about, and leadership is people. It's not a question of him dictating what happens. He shows the leadership, and it's up to others whether they follow. And unfortunately, at this moment in time, unless you show that strength and courage and, fight through what he's doing, and I think even address the nation on this issue, then it's so difficult to win over those young people that are going to be the subjects, the citizens of the future for William and Kate.
And you don't envy the position he's in, inheriting this problem.
No, it's not his fault.
And he's obviously working very hard on a number of fronts of things he cares about, and this is just taking all the focus.
How do you think the wider public are seeing this then? Because you talk about the king, and I agree with you on the leadership stance. Yeah, he has been leading since he's been king, 100%. But how do you think the wider public? Because we've had two visits from the king. He went to Dedham in Essex with Queen Camilla. Then he was up on Monday. He was at Clitheroe in Lancashire, and at both times he was heckled.
Yes, and I believe Republic's, obviously the anti-monarchy group, on those occasions, it was a supporter. They've said it wasn't an organised protest, but it was a supporter. But also the way that the heckling story gained traction globally is obviously because it comes in the middle of this absolute storm. I think the King handled it exactly as he handles these things, which is to just keep calm and carry on and not answer it in that moment. I do think as well, if he was to answer it, because some people say, well, why doesn't he respond? If he was to start doing that, imagine on these walkabouts, then suddenly he's becoming a politician and he's answering questions all the time. I do think that on that front, we heard the heckler speak out. It's obviously very embarrassing. It's gained a lot of attention. But at the same time, you then see in the video that the supporters all around are cheering and the King on and booing the heckler. So I think the King still has widespread support, but I think it's, and as he should, but I do think, to our earlier points, I just think that now is a time when this is very make or break for how they move forward from here. I think he's moving in the right direction there, and he does have a lot of support. But to maintain that, now they need to make sure that they are everyone that should be held accountable is being held accountable. That's the crucial point.
The heckles, those two heckles, and I was in Saudi Arabia when broadcast journalists shouted out to William, even though he was about 500 yards away and couldn't hear them. But these are just performative by certain individuals. Like you mentioned there about Republic, there is a small group that turn up to events, wave "Not My King" flags. There's not many of them, but they can turn up to a public event, get all the headlines because they've had one solo man that has travelled to, it was Lancashire, and shouted out. I mean, the wider public are more or less with the King at the moment, but they're not with Andrew.
They're definitely not with Andrew, but I think that, when you're in the top job, as is the monarch, he's representative not only of the royal family, but of the nation. And so nobody wants to talk down their own country. It's bad enough the American congressmen, making all these demands and telling us what we've got to do, when they're not actually making their own politicians, huge businessmen, their own presidents, accountable themselves. So my answer to the American people that are shouting about our monarchy is get your own house in order, and do that first. But at the same time, I think this shouting out sort of things used to happen much more than people know. I mean, I remember when, in the mid-90s, when the Charles and Diana marriage crisis was going on, there was a man who shouted to Charles, "You should be ashamed," and an egg was thrown at him. So it's not unheard of. In Dresden, there was eggs thrown at the Queen. So things do happen. But I think that the Republic are obviously behind that. But the first time something was shouted, wasn't it? Was in Edinburgh during the Queen's funeral first part of the funeral in Scotland, where a man shouted at Andrew, who was in the procession, and then everything was shut down. Then Lichfield, I think, was a cathedral where that was a bit of a shock from what I've heard to the King, and that's when all of this stuff started to really gain traction. But ultimately, I think that what we've witnessed now is a very strong press asking very difficult questions. We've got a lot of traction online, a lot of interaction, demands, information that's coming out daily. I mean, there are still people trawling through these millions of documents, and it seems more and more things come out, as the journalists that are tasked with it are finding information. And when they've gone through all 3 million of these, there's something like another 2.5 million to be released. Look, if they've got anything to hide, I suggest they go through an internal investigation themselves and start declaring things to the police, so it makes sure they're clean if it comes to a public inquiry. The other thing I do think is quite strange, we keep talking about Andrew giving evidence to an American Congress. We're not a state of America. Surely our parliamentary system that is as old as the champion of democracy around the world should be asked, having an investigation or a parliamentary committee itself, where our heavily paid MPs are calling our system into account. Isn't that partly what they're supposed to do?
Didn't he previously say that a couple of years ago,
he did,
a few scandals back, that he was going to cooperate with US authorities, which obviously he didn't, but he said that himself. So firstly, just call him on that and get him to do that. But I agree that it also should be
so here. Right. You're so right. He not only said that, Andrew said that he was stepping, they took his titles and everything away, the first tranche, so that he could stand up in court and he was going to defend it. That's what he said. I'm free now, and with my lawyers, I'm going to now take this on. And he also said he'd worked tirelessly, didn't need to help victims.
Yeah.
Well, what actually has happened there then? What happened there?
Absolutely nothing. We've touched on the fact that this crisis could or may not be infecting the other members of the royal family. And also, Rob, you were talking there about more allegations coming out. So front page of Today, there's some words from former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who's asking for an investigation into all these Epstein flights coming into the UK, which is then going to obviously infect, what the Border Force doing, what the Home Office doing. But has there been a history of covering things up and not wanting to take accountability within the palace? Because the opening paragraph of this story says, a string of young women were invited to Buckingham Palace by Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, who told flunkies, in quotes, Mrs. Windsor will arrive shortly, please let her in and show her up. The allegation is that this kind of thing has been going on for decades within the palace, Rob.
Well, Matt, Monty, when we go to the palace, and as I say, I've been doing this 36 years, I have to bring my passport
We have two forms of ID. Yeah.
And then we're left, and it's gone through all these checks and everything. So I think there was one story that I remember years ago, you might have written it actually, when Angela Kelly was creating a Mary Hell because they stopped her going in, the Queen's dresser, because she didn't have her identity pass. And there was a story also that Andrew was quite aggressive to the policeman on the door because he had to show his pass. And this is a time when you're dealing with security threats and all this. And we're told that, I think the one lady that had tea at the palace was a Russian lady. And would she have gone through all these checks and passport checks? Doesn't seem to be the same, does it? And I think that there's all sorts of issues about security that must be taken into account. Who do we know who this person was? Who she was working for? If she was taking money from Epstein, would she have taken money from, the Chinese government or the Russian government and planted? All of these, the reason these checks are in place is for security.
And the allegations, they were coming through the private terminal at Stansted, again, are the checks happening back there? Like how far back does this sort of potential free run straight through to the palace go? Where did they originate?
The source that we spoke to says it was common knowledge Andrew liked to have young women visit Buckingham Palace. It was so frequent that they just used to roll their eyes and say, yes, sir.
Can I just say as well, the thing, as I read this article, obviously it doesn't come as a surprise to us now, having read everything we've been reading this last couple of weeks. But these sources have known this. You say they roll their eyes as in it's commonplace, as in they're so used to it because this is how Andrew behaves in the palace. So all of this time, back to the Newsnight interview, back to the allegations, which at the time didn't hold as much water prior to that, but now we know that there is a lot more truth to them. So all the way through all this, all of these people in the palace have seen it. They've seen these potentially shady dealings. They've seen things that don't seem quite right. And they've not felt that they were able to speak out about it until now that there's this avalanche of accusations. So how many people are there that actually can come forward and speak on this? And this goes back again to the accountability question. All of these people need to be interviewed.
Taking all this as a whole, and I'm going off script here, Rob, but are we standing back and looking at this, everything that's been happening, are we possibly seeing the end of the monarchy? Are they in a crisis to end all crises right now?
As I said at the beginning, I don't think it's an existential crisis, but I think they're going to have to reform. And they're going to have to reform.
This is going to push them into changing their ways?
I think they're going to have to reform. I think the King's going to have to give more, give William his free hand, actually. I think that the one people that do come out of this so far, very, very clean are William and Catherine and Sophie and Edward, actually. So I think that he's probably going to have to say this has happened really essentially on his watch because as Prince of Wales, Charles, the last couple of decades of the Queen's reign was doing the heavy lifting. And the big impact's going to be on William and Catherine. So I think they're going to have to draw a line under what's gone on here and allow William and Catherine to say, we want the monarchy to look like this. Now, William has already said he wants monarchy to look like monarchy royalty with a small r. He has talked about cutting all the flunkies. He is somebody who he's not into all this deference and all that. He seems to be a far more modern man than that. And I think really it's the time, at this moment in time, it's for the monarchy, talking about leadership, to sort of look to William and Catherine, because despite all these things that are going on, both of those two people are still very popular and I think will do a good job. And it's damaging whilst there's all this attacking going on about of the Crown, it's damaging to the country and the representation and the reputation of the country. At the moment, the one people we've got is William and Kate.
Are we going to have a King William, though? I mean, the way things are going, are we going to have King William?
I think we will, but I think he has to, or one of them, either the current king, and it falls upon him to do it because he is the boss, as they all call it. But it needs to be far more transparent, far more accountable. And the most important thing about all of this is that we cannot have this old school deference and all of these things where people know wrongdoing, just going back to your point, know that wrongdoing is going on, and because he is a duke and they call him sir, just turn a blind eye. That cannot continue.
So how would the royal family continue, or would the royal family continue and survive if, say, for instance, or Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor continues to deny, he was arrested, seen in handcuffs, in court, jailed?
I think that Andrew has already been identified as the poison. And to your point, I think that there is a lot of goodwill to the work and the reputation that William, Catherine, I think the King and Queen are doing great work as well and pushing out into areas that they're very passionate about. This has obviously been casting a major shadow, particularly recently. But I think that Andrew's the poison. I think people want to see justice. If that ends in exactly those dramatic scenes, I think that it is a difficult time. It is a difficult time for the royal family, that they need to be seen to be doing all the right things and actually make reform in terms of not allowing there to be this secrecy in the households of people coming in and out, at the very least. But I think that they can survive that because there is a lot of goodwill towards them and the work that they do. I don't think it's the end of them. I think because, as I say, Andrew's been cut off. We know Andrew's the problem. It's not a question of who are his accomplices in these misconduct and potential, sex trafficking allegations. No one is suspecting there's other members of the royal family. We know Andrew is the problem, but now they have to now meet the moment in acting all the way through this. As the process goes on, the justice is served.
Just finally on the late Queen, Rob, you touched on it earlier about whether her legacy or her reputation, because it was almost everything happening kind of on her watch. Are we rewriting the Queen's legacy in light of what we're learning over the last couple of weeks? Is it fair?
In April, she was born 100 years ago. I think to criticise her too much it would be wrong. I think she served with dedication and duty all over through her years, and she did as far as a couple of hiccups, the Diana death moment and a couple of other moments. I think she was a great leader. But I think she had, as Bronte said, seemed to have had a blind spot for her lying favourite son, and that she shouldn't necessarily be judged on that. I think that, of course, the last decade or so, the king, our current king, was doing the most of the heavy lifting. He was the man, but he wasn't the ultimate boss, so he couldn't really do make the ultimate call. You only have to look back, don't you, when Prince Philip's memorial service, the Queen arrived with Andrew. And she was making a big statement, so it's quite clear that she wanted to protect him. I think the royal family is essential. No, I don't think it is. I think it's a time for major reform, and that means being more honest, more open, more accountable, far less secrecy, and all these people. When we make an inquiry about what's been going on in official business, it can't be just sealed because it's the Freedom of Information Act doesn't apply, or the Official Secret Act doesn't come out for 50 years. I mean, everyone in this, well, mainly me, but most of the people in this room, you'll be both with walking sticks when the actual documents under the current rules are released, and I'll be, a good 6 foot under. But the reality is...
We are talking existential crisis.
I know.
No, but that's 50, because we are talking 50 years or 30 years before you're going to see these documents. Now, how is that right? 50 years. I suggest anybody who's interested in this, they go and look forensically at the Watergate scandal. And what you said there was right. But there were people in the lower down at the beginning of that who made decisions, okay? They broke into the Watergate Hotel, they did these things. And it was lower down than the president. The president didn't really know everything that was going on. But it was the cover-up that killed him. It was the cover-up because he was the president, and everyone said, you're not going to see the president go. He went. So we don't know, is the answer.
Bronte, can engagements save the day? And I mean the standard, regular, royal work that we cover, all the engagements they do throughout the week. We've had the King holding a reception He was with Wayne Rooney's wife, Colleen Rooney, this week. While everything was going on, I joined William in Saudi Arabia. He met the Crown Prince out there. It was meant to be one of his most important diplomatic missions yet. And the Princess of Wales, I mean, she didn't seem too bothered when she was, or didn't let on to anyone that she was bothered by what was going on when she was visiting a school in Croydon.
There's two parts to it. I think absolutely they need to be seen to be working and doing the job that they are tasked with doing, because as I said, one of the issues is the optics of entitlement. And again, I'm not saying that people think that about them, but obviously going to the Andrew problem, it's an entitlement is as well at the core. So the fact that they're out there doing the work, meeting people, obviously getting on with it all, as we know that they are good at doing. But that also has to go hand in hand with not ignoring the larger problem. And we've seen those statements last week. So was it earlier this week? Gosh, it's been a long week, Matt. So much has happened. So those statements earlier this week. So obviously they're not ignoring it, but that needs to continue. They're not ignoring the larger problem that's playing out at the same time. But I do support the fact that they are getting on with the job, although they will not be getting the attention that they want on these engagements, of course, while these headlines are continuing.
Well, Bronte, you said it's been a long week. It's been a long show as well. So let's try and finish with our quickfire questions and try and lighten up a little bit, although it is, I think, a major crisis the royals are going through right now. So quickfire questions, everybody. After the King met Colleen Rooney at a reception earlier this week, which unlikely royal and celeb pairing has been your favourite over the years?
It's not so much unlikely, but my absolute favourite has to be the late Queen and Paddington. They go hand in hand, two beloved British icons, but I loved everything around that. It was so quintessentially British and very heartwarming.
It's so difficult to come up with, when you've been discussing all these heavy subjects. Bronte just switched straight on to
the jack of all trades.
I mean, it was genius. I think what the unlikely pairing, one of my favourites, as we've got Bronte on, was when I was on the tour in Australia when Paul Keating, whose daughter was actually staying at Epstein's house, it was dubbed the Lizard of Oz by all our wonderful British media, and because he deigned to put his arm around the Queen and touch her, and it was such a scandal at the time. The Lizard of Oz, Paul Keating, and the Queen, and there was all this going on, and I remember that as you're on, we were then when the scandal was developing, and the pictures were everywhere, and we went up to Paul Keating and went to his press conference because I think one of his cabinet ministers had been done for corruption or something, and he was doing a press conference. It is Australia; they change every 5 minutes. And we said, and then there was a guy called Simon McCoy from Sky shouted out, "Sir, how excited? How?" But he says, "How much are you looking forward to the forthcoming visit?" Of the Prince of Wales, who was coming, because we'd gone down there and he'd already done this. And he turned and he just said, "Well, obviously not as excited as you are, mate." And so it was that whole picture of the Queen and the Lizard of Oz, Paul Keating. And if you remember, years later, you had Mrs. Obama, practically giving the Queen a cuddle, and that was seen as okay.
And there you go. I think you're the first person to call Paul Keating a celebrity, but
he was only in Prime Minister for a little while.
As wonderful as your answer was, Rob, these are quickfire questions. Yeah. So next question. No, you've given your answer. Second question. Prince William was, of course, in Saudi Arabia for an important overseas visit. Where would you like to see both he and Catherine go for their next big trip together?
Sorry to make it such an Australiana-themed show, but I'm here. But it is relevant because our Prime Minister last year, Anthony Albanese, said that he'd invited the Prince and Princess of Wales to Australia. So I do think that they should go to Australia.
If they've been invited, of course they should go.
Yeah, but you change your Prime Minister every 2 years.
Yeah, but he's there at them. So go quickly. He's there right now.
I'd like them to go to the World Cup with George, and I'd like them both to be there with George, maybe even to both kids, when England won't lift the World Cup.
Well, I'm going there for a couple of group games, and I've already put in a bid to sit next to William. But I'm going for the group games. Hopefully, he'll be there as well. Bring George. I've checked the school holidays. The Princess of Wales joined children in Croydon for a surprise art lesson this week. But which royal do you think is the best artist?
I went to Balmoral Castle in 2024 and saw the King's artwork exhibition that was in the ballroom there, the dining hall, and it was so beautiful. It was fantastic. So I think the King.
He's good, artist.
Without doubt, the King. I own one of his lithographs signed. So, the King, absolutely. Yeah, God save him.
Famously, I'd like a painting.
I'll sell it to you if you want.
Yeah.
I was going to say, how do we get one? Yeah.
All right, look, we've been through a lot, okay? But the most important thing I want to say about today's show is that we've done like 40, 45 minutes, maybe more. We haven't mentioned Harry and Meghan once.
Oh, we also have to mention that. Oh, you did it.
No,
Andrew
I'm being serious.
Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor denies everything.
I also have to say, and I said in the opening, that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor continues to deny everything, and he always has. But interesting point. We haven't mentioned Harry and Meghan on this show once today.
Oh, it's all about our British royals at the moment. Andrew's pulling a lot of focus.
Or maybe they'll be back next week. I don't think they will. I think it will continue being Andrew. Here we go. Well, thanks, guys. That's all we have time for on this week's Royal Exclusive. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments below as usual, and remember to subscribe to us here on our new Royal Exclusive YouTube channel for all the latest royal news. We'll see you next week.